These speakers have been through post-contest, district contest, zone contest, and now they're here in the last lap. I'll ask that the Legionnaires, everyone stand, Legionnaires are on cover, and we'll have an invocation by Jerry Byington.
Our dear God in heaven, protector of us all, we're very grateful indeed for this final contest in the State Oratorical American Legion Speech and Debate Contest. We're grateful, Father, for the health that allowed us to come here and to participate. We're especially thankful at this time for the dedication of those contestants that are here, the preparations that they have made, and the trials that they've gone through to get to this point in the competition. We're thankful for the university for providing this place for us to use. We ask that Thou would bless the contestants, help them to think clearly and to remember the things that they've studied and learned about. Bless us that we may glean some information from the speeches that they give. We dedicate the next several minutes unto Thee in Thy keeping. Protect us all at this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. And now our Western Zone Chairman John Pellegrini from Anaconda will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The contestants can now leave. We're very fortunate at this time in having a representative of the university giving us a welcome. Professor Jim Lopak. He's a professor of political science and he's acting assistant provost for the university. Jim?
My task this afternoon is relatively simple compared to the task of other people, but yet I think it's something I look forward to. I'm a native of Great Falls, grew up in Great Falls, and as just announced, I'm a professor of political science and associate provost at the University of Montana, and President George Dennison, also a native of Montana who grew up in Kalispell, asked me to come this afternoon and welcome you to the University of Montana. But not only to welcome you, but I want to very sincerely commend the American Legion for the work that it is doing and to commend the participants in this process, in this activity. The American Legion truly deserves commendation for all the wonderful work they do in the area of civic education. Thomas Jefferson observed years ago that democracy, our enjoyment of our freedom, would always be dependent upon our civic education, the degree we understood the basis of our freedom. And the American Legion not only does this work in this activity, but it does this work, for example, in its sponsorship every year of Montana Boys State. And I have very close knowledge of Montana Boys State, not just because in 1959 I was a participant in Boys State, but for 10 years since then I've been on various occasions a counselor at Boys State. And so I know the fine work that they do. Also, I have some knowledge of this oratorical contest. Mr. Barrett gave me the list of the winners over the many years, and I had participated, not at this level, but I had participated in this contest in 1960, and I looked to see who eventually won that, and it was Larry Fossbender, a close friend of mine, and in fact at Great Falls Central High School, he won the contest there and beat me out, so at least I'm happy to see that he went on to win. I remember, though, very much my participation at the lower levels in this contest, and I remember it because of the focus on American political values. I went on to get a PhD degree at the University of Notre Dame in the United States Constitution. I'm now a professor of constitutional law at the University of Montana, so at least I can say that this was part of my education, and I think for the students participating in it in the same way, it's part of their education. So I have nothing but praise for the participants. It is, again, very important that all of us learn as much as we can about the American Constitution, because it is the expression of our political values. It is the statement of the American people of what is most important to us. Also, it's important that we study it because it is so complex. It's not simple. As one commentator said, that the Constitution represents a delicate balance of values, and this is what I think students learn as they study it at any level, the balance of these values and how one plays against another. And lastly, I think it's so important that young people develop a sense of poise and ability to articulate complex ideas and values, and that's what they're gaining here. So again, I welcome you, and I commend the American Legion for your work, and I commend the students for their hard work. Thank you very much.
Jim, are you going to stay? No, I can't. I have a father commitment. I said, you'll have your just whenever you're going to be here. It's going to be an hour and a half, though.
Yeah, I was just asked to do this the other day. I had a prior commitment.
No.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate this
Okay.
very, very much. Thank you ever so much. Most of you folks have been through the mill on this thing. You know how these contests are conducted. There are two portions of it, a prepared oration and an extemporaneous part. The prepared oration will take from 8 to 10 minutes, and the extemporaneous from 3 to 5 minutes. The prepared oration is the first section. Each contestant will come in. They'll be announced as contestant number 1, 2, 3, or 4. At the conclusion of the prepared oration, or just prior to it, we will determine the subject matter for the extemporaneous portion of the contest, and a timer will take contestant number 1 while contestant number 4 is speaking, and he'll take contestant number 1 to another isolation room here, where there will be given 5 minutes to prepare for the extemporaneous portion. This is done so time is saved. You don't have to just wait the full 5 minutes. It won't be exact, of course. Might be a little longer, but this is the way it's handled. We do not want any applause from the audience during their speaking. There's no, of course, no smoking in here, and I think there was no picture taking during their speaking part of the contest. Is this all understood? Are the judges all ready? Now, please raise your hand if you are. Okay, may we have contestant number 1?
This is our first speaker. The title of his speech is The Freedom of Speech.
If men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter, which may involve the most serious and alarming consequences that can invite the consideration of mankind, reason is of no use to us. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. George Washington spoke these words in 1783, and their wisdom still holds true today. In my speech, I would like to talk to you about the First Amendment to the Constitution. Its meaning has significantly changed throughout the years. The First Amendment specifically states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It is my firm belief that the First Amendment has to withstand the test of time, at all costs, if our great nation is to survive. Sadly, many instances in American history point toward the fact the First Amendment has not withstood that test. First, during both world wars, legislation was passed to restrict slanderous speech directed toward the United States and its leaders. Furthermore, these laws were backed up with jail sentences. Many people argued drastic measures like these were necessary in wartime, but I completely disagree. If we take away this freedom to criticize our government, we take away the right for the common man to take part in the decisions this nation makes. In wartime, the views of the people are critical if the government wishes to make essential decisions which the people will support. Without this freedom to make our views known, we would have wars made not by the people, but by the policymakers. This approach to government can hardly stand. Another sad point in our nation's history was the McCarthy period of the early 1950s. Many people have compared the court cases of this time with the Salem witch trials, with good reason. Artists and writers, supposed communists, were blacklisted, unable to work in their field, and often required to turn in others with supposed communist leanings. This showed that we were terrified of communism, and our free speech for a time was anything but free. If only the leaders of that time would have remembered these famous words of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. If there is any principle in the Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought we hate. Next, let's look at a more recent example, the Gulf War. During the conflict, many people believed that the media coverage was detrimental to American war strategy, and that the media should have been censored more strongly. Luckily, this did not happen, because without the media, the whole picture wouldn't have been clear. The media forced us to acknowledge the unpleasant fact that war doesn't always kill the warriors and the dictators, but more often than not, it kills the innocent civilians as well. I hope the extensive news coverage will help prevent further wars. It might, because we saw firsthand the damage mere man can cause, and that in wars of today, there is a new definition of winning. As you can see, our civil rights have been infringed upon many times in our nation's history, not just in these instances, but in other areas as well. Some may choose now to blame the government. This is irrevocably wrong, because it's no one's fault but our own. Americans are born with an inherent duty to protect their civil rights, and primary among them are those in the First Amendment. It is power of the system. It is power of the people, not power of the system, which should guide us. America was founded upon the basic principle that all men are created equal, and that the people are the government. For after all, it is our welfare that is at stake. When we lose grasp of this thought, our world slowly drifts into chaos. We must remember, though, that just talking won't get the job done. The First Amendment gives the right of free speech, but it implies that this free speech will yield action. Recall the speeches recently given by the presidential candidates. They got up on their platforms and declared that unemployment was on the rise. Like we didn't know that already. We're in a recession. Drugs have overrun our country. AIDS is increasing, and our healthcare system is in shambles. The national deficit has even increased while they were speaking. Then when people were really worried, the other candidates got up and yelled, "It's all George Bush's fault." And if we elected them, all our problems would be cured within the hour, or at least within the first term. Then they promptly walked out, shook a few hands, and coochie-cooed a few babies, in the hope that this wonderful speech would help them win the election. Notice, not anywhere in any of their speeches do they give a clear and precise plan of attack. If they really wanted to impress the American public with their free speech, they would have used it to find a reasonable solution to our problems. Unfortunately, not even our own president can do this. Even worse, many people may choose now to go home or to their local town meeting and complain some more, not even thinking once for a solution to our problem. Words freely spoken must be backed up with action freely taken. As we can see, we are faced with many problems in today's world, and one of the most challenging is the protection of our civil rights. I would like you to view this as an obstacle to overcome, because isn't that what Americans do best? Achieve the impossible and climb the highest mountain? Recall, our forefathers wrote on a piece of parchment an almost perfect governmental system, which we hope will continue to protect us and future generations from any further tyranny. In closing, I would like to quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's For Freedom speech, which was delivered to Congress almost 50 years ago. We look forward to living in a world founded upon 4 essential freedoms. The first is freedom of expression and speech everywhere in the world. The second is to worship God in your own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear everywhere in the world. This is a world where I would like to live in, and it is a world which I will work to create. Thank you.
Most family, 8 minutes, 30 seconds. It's her death, no penalty. This is our second speaker. The title of the speech is Treasure the Future Through the Present.
Throughout history, there has never been a nation born into greatness. Never has there been a nation born with the inherent ability to move forward, knowing that they are already among the mightiest of nations. Historically, nations have had to labor extensively to achieve greatness. America was born of a meager 13 colonies who were oppressed by a mighty empire. The Constitution of the United States guided this small band away from its humble origins. The U.S. is arguably the strongest military, political, and economic entity among nations. Many find it difficult to comprehend that the origins of such a mighty republic were bound to one document, the Constitution. Despite all of the changes that America has undergone, the Constitution has lost none of its power to affect our daily lives, how we interact, and it continues to allow us to grow. Once a nation has achieved greatness, it strives to maintain that pinnacle for generations to come. As citizens, we must ask ourselves, what are our duties to the Constitution? How will we continue to move forward? In answering these questions, we can utilize a comparative analysis to decipher the true meaning of the role of the citizen. Each of the branches of our federal government has a special role in developing the nation's guidelines. The legislative branch establishes the laws, the executive branch enforces those laws, and the judicial branch interprets the spirit and the essential nature of a law. Similarly, the triad of people is based on the following planks. The vote, which is the citizen's version of changing the law of the land. The federal income tax system is our version of the executive power to enforce the law. And the right to free speech is a call to interpret. Each of these responsibilities is based in a facet of the Constitution. The right to vote has not always been available to all of our citizens, but through the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave the emancipated slaves the right to vote, the 17th Amendment, which gave the authority to elect the senators to the people, not the legislatures of the states, through the 19th Amendment, which achieved women's suffrage, and by the power of the 26th Amendment, all of us who are over the age of 18 and registered to vote can do their part to effect a state of change. Change seems to be the buzzword of the early 90s, and through change we're able to continuously, peacefully rebuild our government. On January 20th, 1993, millions of Americans witnessed this peaceful transition of power as Bill Clinton waved to George Bush, who gave a thumbs up, almost as if to endorse the future and this grand American tradition. There are no dictators to topple, no bloody revolutions. Our only weapons in this arena are the ballot boxes and the ballots in them. The Constitution also provides the people with another responsibility that brings Americans closer to the finances of this nation. The year of 1913 was the year of the Underwood Tariff, which was actually an attempt to reduce America's dependence on foreign interests by lowering the amount our government used tariffs on foreign goods as a source of operational revenue. The federal income tax was the result of the quest to find a fair and equitable replacement for the lost revenues. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. So reads the 16th Amendment, which is still considered to be a progressive system of taxation. With the amendment, the citizens were given the role of the monetary provider. If I had kept a summer job and I paid these three mystery men a FICA, state, and federal tax, you bet I'm going to pay attention to what happened to 20% of my income. With a staggering national debt that hovers at over $4 trillion and deficit estimates that amount to approximately $400 billion annually, we have to make sure we pay our taxes. Then we need to make sure that the money is spent effectively. When our nation was on the brink of creation, we cried out against taxation without representation. Now that we have taxation with representation, America needs participation in this vital area. The First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States holds the key to the final inherent responsibility of the citizen to our government and our Constitution. Through the communication of ideas, others may gain a working knowledge of what is happening in our federal government. By speaking out on what is or is not being done by our elected representatives, we can make waves or reinforce someone else's position. Through this process, we guide the future of our government, our nation, and our Constitution. The civil rights movement has involved speech. It made waves throughout our society through the fiery oration of individuals such as Martin Luther King Jr., individuals with dreams. As marked by the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the dreams turned into progress and reform. By speaking out, the people act as the judge of all of our society's strengths and weaknesses, both past and present. When Upton Sinclair composed The Jungle, he set out to warn the American people of the afflictions that existed within the meat that they ate. Upton Sinclair exercised his right of speech to urge improvement in the condition of food that Americans would eat for all generations to come. Upton Sinclair strove for positive change. In England, common law is based on legal precedent. Our common law is based on the individual, uniquely contributing words without restriction by the government, uniquely setting precedent by adding knowledge to our country. The future depends on its ability to draw on the unique ideas of America today. The triad of the people is bound to the Constitution, it is based in the Constitution, and it protects the Constitution. By paying taxes, we empower the government to action. By speaking out for what we believe in, we direct the government's actions. And by voting, we peacefully change the face of our government, charting a new course in the turbulent seas of an ever-changing world. The role of the people is to exercise all of their powers, thus fulfilling their inherent constitutional responsibilities. Since the citizens are acting on an individual basis, they can strive for greater participation by all of the people. The more we do, the more we encourage others to take the crucial first step. Through the privilege of citizenship, individuals may call out for deficit reductions, health care reform, support for the troops overseas, education, and whatever else is a key issue that impacts a particular citizen. If Americans utilize all of their powers to the fullest measure, then perhaps the powers that be will listen to you and to me. Alexander Hamilton stated that the Constitution should consist only of general provisions. The reason is that they must necessarily be permanent, and they cannot calculate for the possible change of things. Things have changed dramatically over the past 210 years, but one element has remained relatively unchanged: the Constitution. It is the root that all else springs from. The branches of the federal government and the powers of the citizen have become cause for emerging democracies around the world to study the American system and wonder about its success and its future. The role of the citizen is to exercise all their powers. In this way, the American system will be nurtured. The Constitution will continue to grow stronger, and it will continue to make other nations wonder. The powers that be will listen to you and to me. As Alexander Hamilton told an emerging republic, change is natural. The Constitution allows Americans to change with secure hearts and minds. Speak out, vote, and pay taxes. This is the blueprint that is found in the pages of the Constitution. It is the form of the Constitution, so that it continues to be a shining symbol of America that is passed from age to age. Thank you.
Note that the line is 5 seconds. 9 minutes and 5 seconds. Title of our third contestant's speech. Pardon me. Voting, a right or obligation.
To vote or not to vote? That is the question. And it is a question that Americans ask themselves each year, at every election. Sadly, many people choose not to participate in this important event. People all over the world are fighting and even dying for the right to vote. Yet Americans treat it like it is only a right, something we should do only if we want to. But voting is not a right, but an obligation. It is what makes our country a democracy. Without it, we would not be able to choose any of our leaders, from the president to a new school board member. When our country was formed, its main goal was equal rights for all citizens. Yet when it came to voting, only a select few could participate. Women, slaves, and men who did not own property were prohibited from participating in this important event. This right, which so many took for granted, was to them an unattainable goal, one that they yearned to have. Over the years, Americans fought and died for this right, and today it has been extended to all citizens, regardless of sex, race, or even intelligence level. But many people seem to have forgotten the importance of voting. In the 1988 presidential election, only 57% of the adult eligible voters voted. Even more ironic, only 39% of the unemployed voted for a change. There are many legitimate reasons for not voting, such as being ill or unexpectedly gone the day of the election. But many people give unreasonable excuses, such as, I just don't have time to bother with it, or my vote won't make a difference, he'll win the election anyways. Fact is, one vote can make a difference. In the 1960 presidential election, If one more person from each precinct had voted for Richard Nixon, he would have become our 35th president. John F. Kennedy immortalized himself when he stated, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Sadly, many people seem to have forgotten or ignored his words. Too many of us today are always looking for a free handout or demanding that the government do something to make our lives better. But what Americans don't realize is that we are the government, and through voting, we can and must make a difference. We seem to use the word right quite freely. We have the right to freedom of speech, the right to choice of religion, the right to assemble. But to me, voting is not a right, but a duty or obligation that we must hold ourselves to if we are to preserve our country and its Constitution. The old adage, "If you don't use it, you'll lose it," has never been truer than today in regards to our right to vote. By not voting, we cannot maintain our Constitution. One might ask why I consider it a right to vote, not a right. For me, I believe that if we do not use our rights, we will eventually lose them. By not voting, you are not remaining one of the silent majority, as so many people assume. Instead, you are giving a vote to the opposition. If the number of non-voters becomes too great, it may become economically feasible to simply eliminate the election process altogether. The first step in losing all of our rights. It is a parent's duty not only to the Constitution, but also to their children to vote. Parents must teach their children that they can make choices, that what they believe and do can make a difference. For the child who grows up believing that he can make choices, even when peer pressure is intense and media hype intrusive, the realization that we live in a society where freedom of speech is a constitutional right will hold far-reaching significance, because the right to vote is a freedom of expression. There are so few countries today where individuals are granted the freedom of expression and the right to vote. In those countries where even these basic rights are denied, citizens such as you and I have no say in their country. They have no say in the laws that were passed that will affect them and their children. They have no control over the men and women who become their leaders, who shape their lives. They have no say whatsoever in the future of their country, their lives, or their children's lives. But you and I do have a say in how our country is run, through the programs we endorse, through the changes we make. Each and every one of us is affected by who gets elected and which legislation gets passed. The more individuals who vote, the longer our constitutional system will last, and the longer it will survive. By not voting, you are not keeping strong our country. And if you fail to vote, it is tantamount to treason, to betraying our country and all that it stands for. On a closing note, I would like to share with you a poem which expresses my feelings on voting or any other duty. Lifting and Leaning by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. There are two types of people on earth today. Just two types of people. No more, I say. Not the good and the bad, for 'tis well understood. The good are half bad, and the bad are half good. Not the happy and sad, for the swift flying years bring each man his laughter, and each man his tears. Not the rich and the poor, for to judge a man's wealth, one must first know the state of his conscience and his health. Not the humble and proud, for in life's busy span, one who puts on vain airs is not counted a man. No, the two types of people on earth I mean are the people who lift and the people who lean. Wherever you go among the earth's masses, you will ever find are divided in just these two classes. And strangely enough, you will find too, I ween, there is only one lifter to 20 who lean. Which one are you? Do you carry the load of overtaxed lifters who toil down the road? Or are you a leaner who lets others bear your portion of worry and labor and care? Which one are you? Are you a lifter or a leaner? Are you going to vote or depend on everyone else to keep our democracy strong? I plan on voting as soon as I am eligible. It is an honor that I will greatly appreciate, and I strongly urge you to also do your duty. Thank you.
And number 3, I'll read to you so the judges and everyone else knows what they're supposed to talk about. It's Article 3, Section 3, paragraphs 1 and 2. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on a testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainer of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attained.
The title of our 4th contestant's speech is Term Limitations, the People's Choice.
34 years. This is twice my age. It's the same number of years that Francis Bardneau has been a member of the Montana House of Representatives. Coincidentally, Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia has also served for 30 years in the United States Senate. Is this good or is this bad? Leaders like this provide good experience in leadership to the houses they serve in. But as a leader, is a leader with this much experience in tenure almost unbeatable? These are real stories facing Americans today and real issues. The issue is term limitations. This isn't the first time that term limitations has been addressed. In 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, our founding fathers debated the idea of limiting congressmen and presidents. An opponent of term limitations at the convention was quoted as saying, "The American people can be trusted to keep a reasonably close eye on their representatives, that the American people are not fools." A supporter, while still at the convention, expressing his view, was quoted as saying, "Our congressmen will become inattentive, callous, selfish, the fountain of corruption." Needless to say, in 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, our framers decided against limiting our congressmen or our presidents. Today, Article 1, Section 2 and 3 of the United States Constitution states, the representatives will be re-elected every 2 years and senators every 6 years. But there's no limit to the number of times they can be re-elected. After President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was elected to his 4th term as president, Congress decided restrictions needed to be placed on the president. So today, Amendment 22 of the United States Constitution states that presidents can only serve 2 terms, therefore 8 years as president. President Eisenhower was an avid supporter of term limitations. He even outlined his own plan. In this plan, he said, and I quote, "Senatorial tenure should be limited to 2 terms of 6 years, and that of House members to 3 terms of 4 years. A few days later, President Eisenhower concluded, "After all, we have already limited the president to 2 terms. It strikes me that what is good for the president might very well be good for Congress." President Eisenhower and his supporters support 5 major points. Point number 1, a democratic society wanders from the true wants and desires of the people. With this, there's the idea of career congressmen versus citizen congressmen. Career congressmen have spent all or most of their adult life as congressmen, but citizen congressmen are merely taking a leave of absence from their job. How can career congressmen represent the people when they're never out among the people? Point number 2, it is proven the longer your congressman is in office, the more bad habits he develops. Studies have shown the longer they are in office, the more apt they are to overspend the budget. They begin to worry about minor things. Instead of the whole forest of America, they worry about every single tree. On the national level, each senator or representative worries about each tree in his own state instead of the whole forest of America. Point number 3, term limitations could encourage a variety of candidates. People will run who have the common sense not to want to spend the rest of their lives in office. More women and non-lawyers from the private sector will run. Point number 4, higher turnover often leads to less deadwood. Seniority does not always make your congressman smarter. They were just as smart when they entered office, but often they have lost touch, developed what is referred to in Washington as Potomac fever. This is the disassemblement or the breakdown of the priorities of the private sector. Supporters of term limitations believe term limitations could once again make Congress mortal. Point number 5, term limitations could increase election night turnout. In 1986 and 1988, 98% of the incumbents were reelected. So today, there's an apathy in voting. People don't vote because the incumbents always win. This poses another problem. When people don't vote, there are no election night contests. And the election night contests are supposed to be the checks and balances on the 2 houses. But when there are no contests, there are no checks and balances. Now you've heard the supporters of term limitations 5 points. Now for the opponents of term limitations 4 points. Number 1, this is a simple one. If you're unhappy with your congressman, simply vote him or her out. Once again, 98% of the incumbents were reelected. So are Americans really that unhappy? This is how our founding fathers felt. The American people can be trusted to keep a close eye on their representatives. Point number 2, is it even constitutional for the states to think they can limit the terms of their federal congressmen? Many scholars believe no. This restricts the democratic electoral process and the idea of voter choice. President Reagan was an avid opponent of term limitations. He opposed presidential term limitations and congressional term limitations. When speaking of presidential term limitations, he said, and I quote, "Limiting the president to 2 terms limits your democratic right to vote for whomever you want to vote for as many times as you want to vote for them." The idea of term limitations could become a decision of the United States Supreme Court. Point number 3, term limitations could make Congress less effective as a whole. Term limitations will shift the power from elected officials to unelected officials and private interests. These private interests will be bureaucrats, lobbyists. They will have no term limitations. In essence, they will have the seniority and the power. Point number 4. Seniority often leads to key leadership positions. Whether these positions are on committees or subcommittees, they give states a voice in the national government. We have one representative, Representative Pat Williams. Without seniority, he may never move into a key leadership position. Therefore, Montana may never have an effective voice in the United States House of Representatives. In the recent election, Americans voted for change. 14 states passed state constitutional amendments in support of term limitations. Change was the big idea in the last election. Everyone wanted change. So now are they demanding a change in the terms of their federal congressmen? Whether this is a change in a law mandating term limitations, or whether Americans simply change the way they vote, there will be a change. President Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address, when speaking of our government, said, "Our government is of the people, by the people, and for the people." Decisions like this always reflect the people. So now I ask you, what will the people decide? Thank you.
Penalty, 8 minutes, 51 seconds.
Hear that? 8 minutes and 51 seconds. No time.
This will be the first of our extemporaneous.
Let's go back in time to World War II. Imagine it, you're a nuclear scientist and you're working on the Manhattan Project. And you're making all sorts of discoveries dealing with nuclear science in the hope that you can create a bomb or some other sort of new discovery. But little do you know, a German spy is among your group. And all the information you're finding out automatically goes over to Germany. This could mean that Germany could get the bomb first. What if Germany did get the bomb first due to this? America could no longer exist. Clearly, treason against your country is a terrible crime. But our founding fathers did not have this in mind when they mentioned treason in the Constitution. They mentioned it to protect others from needless prosecution. Benjamin Franklin once said that treason is an old device used by tyrants to get rid of people they don't like. And this is why it's mentioned, to protect us from the government and other people who are needlessly accusing people of treasonous acts. The definition of treason, when dealing with it in the Constitution, is that treason can only occur in wartime. Yet many people use the term very loosely. Remember the McCarthy period. McCarthy went around the country and accused people of treasonous acts, yet it wasn't wartime. Treason, the accusation of treason can often be fueled by paranoia. When you're dealing with a situation that you don't understand or you're dealing with needless fear, you often tend to blame others. And clearly the Founding Fathers wanted to prevent this. They also mentioned the following requirements. To accuse someone of treason, you need 2 witnesses. And also, if the person is accused and found guilty, the other family members cannot be convicted or needlessly hurt. Many times in our nation's history, people have been falsely accused, and our Founding Fathers realized this, and this is why they mentioned so strongly in the Constitution that we have to be sure if someone has created treason. Treason is the only crime defined in the Constitution. This is really interesting. It shows us how importantly they felt that this needed to be mentioned to protect others from needless prosecution. Just imagine if McCarthy could have gotten away with accusing people of treason all over the country, and imagine how many people would have been convicted in other wars if this wouldn't have been mentioned in our Constitution. We have to remember we cannot be moved by fear. We have to look at things reasonably and go through a series of process to find out if someone's really guilty. Our founding fathers clearly wanted us to look at things this way to protect people from needless prosecution. Treason is a horrible crime, but being falsely accused is much worse. Our founding fathers realized this, and this is why treason is in the Constitution. Thank you.
No penalty, 3 minutes, 18 seconds.
You heard that? No penalty.
It is a Saturday night in Washington, D.C. All should be quiet in the State Department. But instead, a flashlight glimmers through the hallways, and people begin to wonder about the intentions of this type of an individual. As an individual walks into an area where they obviously should not be and opens a file cabinet and begins to take photos, we begin to ask ourselves, treason, how important is Article 3, Section 3, paragraphs 1 and 2? In analyzing the importance of treason in the minds of the Founding Fathers and in the current sense, we must break this article down into 3 separate points. Our first point will cover the various aspects of what is considered to be a treasonous act. And then we will move on and we will analyze the difficulty in convicting an individual of treason. Why is it so difficult to do so? And finally, we will analyze the congressional authority over an individual who has been convicted of treason. Let's get back to our first point of analysis, which once again was the various elements that are considered treasonous. Our Founding Fathers set up a very strict guideline for treason: levying war against the United States or providing aid or comfort to an enemy. For this very reason, Aaron Burr was not convicted of treason when he tried to set up his own republic, or his own monarchy actually, all the way from the Ohio River Valley to Mexico, because he had not yet levied war on the United States. But he did sail away to Europe because he knew that the angry crowds outside may come for him. And for that very reason, we must move on to our second point of analysis, the difficulty in convicting an individual. The United States of America is not for mob justice. The United States of America stands for fair, democratic processes, and therefore, individuals such as Aaron Burr, no matter what crime they may have committed, are still entitled as Americans to their Fifth Amendment rights and to their rights that have been given to them by law by the Congress of the United States. Therefore, you must either gain open confession of a treasonous act or must have 2 witnesses state in open court that, yes, they did commit this treasonous action. This ensures that an individual will not be falsely accused and locked away by a system of justice that has gone bad. Justice is supposed to be blind, and treason is supposed to be considered very, very carefully. But what about during World War II, when the Japanese Americans on the Pacific coast were accused of being a threat, and they were moved to camps in the interior of the country? What about this event? They committed no treasonous actions, yet they were locked away. And so we can see we all don't want to be locked away for some government action. And events such as this are protected if this clause is adhered to. Moving along to our third and final point for today. Treason. In its purest form, when convicted, you will be sentenced by the Congress of the United States of America. Congress has the right to declare punishment, but they cannot, except during the life of an individual, take an individual's inheritance that he will be giving to his children or her children. They cannot do that. That is called corruption of blood. And they cannot take away an individual's past honors if you had been a congressman of the United States or won the Congressional Medal of Honor, you were still entitled to those rights, no matter what else you have done, no matter what treasonous action you committed. This ensures that the government will not punish an individual in excess, and this ensures that the Constitution will be fair to all people. And so as we see this individual walking down the hallways of the State Department with his camera and his film, walking out of the State Department and selling this information to the highest bidder, we realize that the security of the United States may be at times at risk, as evident by the World Trade Center bombing. But the reality of the situation is that treason is a very difficult act to be convicted of, and the Founding Fathers intended it to be that way. Thank you.
No penalty, 4 minutes, 37 seconds.
4 minutes and 37 seconds. I've allowed a gentleman from Missoulian to take some pictures, or not, that shouldn't be the terminology because he doesn't use a flash. He'll stand off to this side, and apparently this does not interfere with the rules set out by National on this thing.
Article 3. This article deals with treason, which is the only crime defined in our Constitution. The framers of the Constitution defined very specific guidelines for the accusation of treason, since they knew it was a tyrant's favorite weapon. Even today, in other parts of the world, treason is still being used to get rid of political opponents. Treason can consist of only two things. 1, levying war against the United States. Or 2, giving our enemies aid or comfort. Treason can be only accused if there are two witnesses to the same act, or if the person accused confesses in open court. A person cannot be accused of treason unless it is wartime, but Congress has made it a crime in either wartime or in peace to commit espionage, sabotage, or to conspire to do any of these. This article affects all American citizens, regardless if they are at home or abroad, and all permanent resident aliens. The penalty for treason cannot be passed down to members of the family of the person who committed the crime. And although this does not affect state treason, state constitutions have placed amendments which allows for their crime. The penalty for treason is a minimum of 5 years in prison and or a $10,000 fine, and the maximum is death. There have been few cases of treason in our history, and none of those has the person ever been executed. There have been cases, however, where there has been treason against the state. One example of this is John Brown, who attacked a federal arsenal so he could get weapons to free the slaves. I would like to leave you today with a quote from Joseph Addison. "Is there not some chosen curse, some hidden thunder in the stores of heaven, read with uncommon wrath, to blast the man who owes his greatness to his country's ruin?" Thank you.
We have a penalty, 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
There's 1 point for each minute or fraction thereof, over or under allotted time. And she was under it, so 1 point penalty.